The ACC, Florida State, and Clemson have finally reached a revenue distribution settlement. Now, for those of you that have not been paying attention, Florida State and the ACC and Clemson and the ACC, they've basically been in a four-way lawsuit where ACC has countersued Florida State and Clemson and Florida State are suing the ACC to try to challenge their grant of rights so that they can get out and go to a different conference, what have you. So that's been going on for a while now. But we have now finally reached a settlement. And this is a really good thing for the near term of the ACC. Now, the grant of rights for the ACC remains intact. That's the first takeaway that you need to understand when looking at this settlement. The grant of rights means that the Florida State Seminoles and the Clemson Tigers and everybody else, their rights are still owned by the Atlantic Coast Conference through 2036. But starting next year, that would be 2026, their exit fee will go from a couple $100 million now down to $165. And then from $165 million, that fee declines by $18 million per year. And then it levels out in the calendar year of 2030 and 2031, and it levels out at $75 million. That means that in 2030, 2031, any ACC team, if they want to write a check for $75 million, they are free and clear. They will then own their own media rights. They will have the right to shop their media rights. And if they want to, at that time, go into another conference, they will be able to do that, assuming they can write that $75 million check. Now, right now, they have to pay, if they were to leave before June of 36, it'd be pretty significant, right? So a lot of money, hundreds of millions of dollars, okay? The timing of this exit is very intriguing. The Big Ten's rights are up in 2029, 2030. The Big 12 is up in 2030. And the next college football playoff negotiation will be up in 2031. So that is all going to be kind of figured out before these other ACC schools can jump into the pool and figure out what they might be worth as well. Now, in addition to the exit penalty reduction, that's just a small piece of what's gone down with the settlement. The ACC is officially introducing a new, quote, brand initiative that will give additional revenue to the ACC schools that do the best on television. So the higher the television ratings are in the games that you participate in, the more likely you are to get more money from the ACC, which is really impressive. And I think that's part of why Clemson and Florida State have cooled on pursuing other avenues, because Clemson and Florida State are going to be among the highest rated television programs in the ACC. Those programs are going to do great on TV, especially if Clemson's as good as I think they're going to be. And if Florida State can somehow revert back to the quality that we saw from them in 2023. Now, this is big because now the projections are about $120 million in new revenue over the next 6 years to the ACC's brand initiative. It's about $20 million annually that could go to the highest levels of the ACC school, which would close the gap considerably between the Big Ten, the SEC, and the ACC, which right now the gap is massive, but that extra $20 million a year would be really valuable for those schools that would have the leverage to go elsewhere if they got out of the ACC. That's big. You also look at the bottom of the ACC. In order to pay that $20 million annually to the top dogs, it's going to cost about $7 million to the schools at the bottom. But administrators from the bottom have said that that's an acceptable loss because the trade-off, because of this settlement, is the stability that it offers all the member institutions. Long story short, I just gave you the facts of what went down. Let's now get into the opinions. Do I think this will work? Absolutely not. Not in the long term. I think it's good right now to calm the waters and to create create a little bit of an even playing field with your contenders and the top teams in the top conferences. It's great here in the next 2 or 3 years. But 5-6 years from now, it sounds right now, yeah, $7 million loss is an acceptable loss. Well, when you start having to cut programs and all of a sudden you're no longer competitive because over the next 6 years, you've lost, I don't know, in the vicinity of $40+ million because you're a bottom feeder in the ACC, that's a huge problem. We have seen this model fail before. This happened in the Big 12. Remember when Texas went in there and said, hey, this is what we want. We're going to go to the Pac-12 unless you give us uneven revenue distribution. We want the rights to launch the Longhorn Network, all these other things. Texas did this in the Big 12, and what did that lead to? It led to Texas A&M and Missouri leaving the league to join the SEC. Once the SEC got both Missouri and Texas in their footprint, their numbers and their revenues went up considerably. They launched the SEC network. It became must-see TV. So Texas's greed led to teams leaving, which led to a propping up of a league that was at one point very competitive with the Big 12. I don't think this is going to work long term. Now, is this good if you're Clemson? Is this good if you're Florida State? Sure, absolutely. But how good is this for Virginia? How good is this for North Carolina? Are those two programs who might not have the same viewership as Clemson and Florida State? North Carolina and Virginia might not have the same viewership. But guess what North Carolina and Virginia have? They have the ultimate leverage when it comes to leaving the ACC. So, yes, you calm the waters with the Tigers and the Seminoles, but now do you potentially take money out of Virginia, out of their bottom line? Because I don't think that'd be a very good play long term, because guess what? If Virginia decides to write a check in 2030 to leave the ACC, you know who's going to want them? Same can be said for North Carolina. If North Carolina starts taking a loss because Clemson and Florida State get more, North Carolina starts taking a little bit of a loss, that's great. But guess what? When North Carolina writes that $75 million check in 6 years, everybody's going to want them too. The teams with the most leverage in possible conference realignment are not Clemson and Florida State. It's North Carolina and Virginia. Why? Because North Carolina and Virginia are bordering states to the Southeastern Conference, and it would be continuous as the SEC has made it a priority so that if they expand, they want bordering states. They don't want a coast-to-coast conference. But if they can keep in line and keep all their states connected, they can achieve this. North Carolina, Virginia would be very attractive to the Southeastern Conference if they were available. But guess what? The Big Ten also wants North Carolina and Virginia. Why? Because they're outstanding academic institutions, and they align culturally with what the Big Ten has been in the past. So it'll be interesting. It's great that we have now solved today's problem. That's amazing. But I think when we fast forward to 2030, we're going to have more problems as a result of this settlement than we did going in.